The corridor lights hummed with a faint, almost living pulse as Dr. Ilara Miles walked the length of the ship. Her boots struck the floor in a slow rhythm, and though she tried to keep her breathing steady, the air already felt heavier than it should have. The Odyssey was vast, but silence filled its hallways like a second atmosphere. She paused by one of the reinforced windows and stared out into the stars. The planet below, the one that would become the crew's obsession, was a slate-grey sphere marked with jagged lines like scars. Clouds moved sluggishly across its surface, concealing and revealing the darkness beneath. Ilara's voice carried softly in the empty hall. "You've seen better destinations," she murmured. "Talking to yourself again?" Commander Rourke's gravelly tone startled her. He approached from behind, tall and broad-shouldered, with the bearing of someone who could control a room with presence alone. He wasn't smiling, though his words carried a dry humor. "I think it's healthier than talking to you," Ilara said, but her lips twitched with the ghost of a grin. Rourke gave a short laugh. "Fair enough. Briefing in 10, don't be late." His boots echoed away, leaving her with the view of the planet. Something in the blackness below caught her eye, something that seemed to move. A flicker of shadow against shadow. She blinked, but it was gone. Just clouds, she told herself. Just clouds. The crew gathered in the briefing room, its curved walls lined with flickering displays. A low hum of conversation filled the space until Commander Rourke raised a hand. The voices died instantly. "All right, listen up," he said, his tone sharp but steady. "We've been circling this rock for days, and the scans keep turning up anomalies. The surface is hostile, uncharted, and according to our instruments, alive in ways it shouldn't be. We're going down to take a closer look." A ripple of unease passed through the crew. Engineer Mason leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Alive? You mean vegetation? Microbes? What? Don't tell me we're chasing ghosts." His voice carried a sarcasm that did little to hide his nerves. "Not ghosts," Rourke said flatly. "But not plants or microbes either. Energy signatures we can't classify, moving patterns. Almost intelligent." That silenced Mason. Ilara cleared her throat. "The radiation levels alone make this place a nightmare. Whatever's down there, it survived in conditions that should sterilize life. That makes it valuable. Dangerous, but valuable." Beside her, Lieutenant Arras shifted uncomfortably. "So we're walking into the unknown, hoping we don't end up part of some science experiment." "You're not wrong," Mason muttered. Rourke's eyes swept across them. "We do the job we were sent here for: exploration, data collection, and if possible, retrieval of samples. But no heroics. Stick to protocol, and we'll all come back breathing." There was no applause, no cheer, just a tense silence. As the crew dispersed, Ilara lingered. She noticed Lieutenant Jonah Hale waiting at the door, his expression guarded. He caught her eye for a moment, then quickly looked away, but not before a faint smile betrayed him. She felt warmth creep up her neck, and she hated herself for it. This wasn't the place, and definitely not the time. Jonah waited until the others were gone. "You believe we're ready for this?" he asked quietly. Ilara hesitated. "Doesn't matter if I do. We're going anyway." Jonah studied her, then nodded. "Yeah, that's what I thought." His voice was steady, but his eyes lingered a moment too long before he walked out. Ilara stood alone in the room, the hum of the ship pressing against her ears. For a moment, she thought she heard something else beneath it, a faint whisper, low and distorted, threading through the static of the intercoms. She shook her head. Imagination. Stress. Nothing more, but the sound followed her as she left. Mason muttered under his breath, "Feels like we're dropping into a furnace." "It's stable," Rourke barked from the cockpit. "Barely, but stable. Sit tight." The air grew thicker, darker. Lightning forked across the sky, splitting the heavens with violent flashes that left after-images dancing in their vision. Then slowly, the storm gave way. The planet's surface unfolded below them, ashen plains stretching to the horizon, broken by jagged mountains that clawed at the sky. Rivers of black liquid wound through the valleys like veins. The ground shimmered faintly, as though heat rose from beneath, but the scanners confirmed it wasn't heat. It was energy. Ilara leaned forward. This place shouldn't exist. Jonah said quietly, and yet here we are. The shuttle landed hard, kicking up a storm of dust that clung to the hull like ash. When the ramp lowered, the crew hesitated before stepping out. The air was thin, metallic, every breath biting at the lungs even through the filters in their helmets. The ground crunched beneath their boots, brittle and sharp, like walking on shattered glass. Rourke raised his rifle and scanned the horizon. Stay tight, helmets sealed, comms open. They moved forward as a group, their suits' lights casting narrow beams into the endless grey. Silence pressed in from all sides, broken only by the rasp of their breathing. It wasn't until they reached a ridge that they saw it. The structure rose from the earth like a wound, jagged and unnatural, its black stone surface pulsing faintly with light. It wasn't shaped by erosion or tectonics, this was built. Ancient, alien, and wrong. Mason swore under his breath, "That's no rock." Elara's heart pounded. She could feel something emanating from it, a vibration in her bones. The whispers returned, curling at the edge of her consciousness. Jonah stepped closer, his voice hushed. "It feels like it's watching us." Rourke's hand shot up. "Nobody touch anything. We scan, we record, we get out, understood?" They nodded, but their eyes were fixed on the structure. Its surface seemed to shimmer, warping like heat haze. The air grew colder. As Elara activated her scanner, the readings spiked wildly. "This isn't possible. It's—" She froze. The surface moved, not like a trick of the eye, but truly moved. The black stone rippled as though it were flesh, and for a moment a shape pressed outward. Long fingers, clawed, straining against the barrier. Then it was gone, leaving only the faint pulse of light. "Did anyone else?" Jonah started, his voice shaking. "We all saw it," Rourke cut in, his tone hard. "Form up, we're leaving." But as they turned back toward the shuttle, the ground beneath them trembled. The ridge split open with a deafening crack, and from the fissure rose a sound that wasn't wind or stone. It was a scream, low, guttural, echoing across the barren plains. The crew froze, hearts hammering. And then silence. Elara's breath fogged her visor. "Commander," she whispered, "what the hell did we just wake up?" No one answered. The crew made their way back across the ridge in silence. Each footstep crunched too loudly in the still air. Their helmet lights bobbed across the jagged ground, throwing shadows that seemed to twitch when no one moved. Jonah fell in step beside Elara. His voice was low, almost intimate on the private comm channel. "You felt it too, didn't you? That pulse." Elara hesitated. "It wasn't just a reading. It was inside me, like it was searching." Jonah glanced back at the structure. Its faint glow pulsed in the distance, like a beacon. "Whatever that is. I don't think it wants us here." Rourke's voice snapped over the open channel. "Keep chatter minimal, eyes forward." The commander marched at the front, every line of his body rigid. But Elara saw the stiffness in his shoulders, the way his grip tightened on the rifle whenever the wind shifted. He was afraid, though he'd never admit it. Mason lagged behind, muttering under his breath as he checked his scanner again and again. "Power readings off the charts. Doesn't make sense. Shouldn't be stable." They reached the shuttle, its hull dusted in grey ash. For a moment, relief washed through the group. They moved faster, boots striking the ramp. The interior lights flickered as they stepped inside, the hum of the ship oddly muted. Rourke sealed the hatch and turned to them. His visor reflected the harsh glow of the cabin lights, hiding his eyes. "We're running full diagnostics. No one leaves until we know exactly what we're dealing with." Elara sank into a seat, removing her helmet with a sharp hiss of pressure release. The recycled air tasted stale, but safer than the metallic tang outside. Jonah sat across from her, helmet still on, staring at nothing. His leg bounced restlessly. "You should breathe," she said softly. He shook his head. "Not yet." Silence stretched, broken only by the beeping of Mason's scanner. The crew looked like shadows against the sterile walls, each lost in their own thoughts. Then the lights flickered again. Just once, off, on, as though the ship itself blinked. Mason froze. That wasn't us. Power draw came from inside the hull. Rourke was already moving toward the system's console. Run a full sweep. Ilara's stomach twisted. She glanced at Jonah, and for a moment she thought she saw movement reflected in his visor. Something crawling just behind her. She spun, but the cabin was empty. Only cold air and humming machines. Jonah's voice cracked. You saw it too, didn't you? Ilara didn't answer. The shuttle suddenly groaned, metal straining as though something pressed against the outer hull. The sound echoed through the cabin, deep and deliberate. Everyone froze. 3 slow knocks reverberated from the underside of the ship. Knock, knock, knock. Mason dropped his scanner, the device clattering to the floor, his face drained of color. That's not possible. Nothing followed us. Rourke raised his rifle toward the hatch. Stay sharp. But Ilara knew. Whatever had been in that structure wasn't bound to stone and earth anymore. It had followed them, and now it wanted inside. The knocks stopped as suddenly as they'd begun. The silence that followed was worse. Every creak of metal, every hiss of the ventilation system felt deliberate, as though the ship itself was being listened through. Rourke held his rifle steady at the hatch. Mason, where's that sweep? Mason's hands shook as he keyed in commands. The screen glowed pale against his face. Nothing on thermal, nothing on motion, nothing outside. But he swallowed hard. There's an energy spike inside the ship, mid-deck. Inside, Jonah's voice cracked. We've been sealed the whole time. The commander's jaw tightened. Either your scanner's malfunctioning or… He didn't finish the thought. We move, now. The crew rose, weapons drawn, helmets back on. The hum of the ship seemed louder in the narrow corridors, lights flickering just enough to twist shadows into shapes. They moved as a unit, but unease bled into every step. Ilara walked near the rear, her pulse hammering. Every corner they passed felt like an ambush waiting to happen. They reached the mid-deck. The air here was colder, a faint mist curling along the floor vents. The lighting above buzzed, dimming to a sickly orange. Mason checked the scanner again. Right here, right? He froze, eyes wide. The display flickered, static crawling across the screen. And then, clear for a moment, a humanoid outline appeared, standing in the middle of the corridor. But there was nothing there. Jonah swore and swung his rifle at the empty air. It's messing with us. It's in our heads. Rourke's voice was a low growl. Steady. He stepped forward, rifle raised. His boot crunched on the mist-shrouded floor, each movement deliberate. Ilara felt her skin crawl. Her breath fogged inside her helmet, though the air shouldn't have been that cold. She whispered, almost to herself, It's watching us. As if in response, the lights overhead died. Darkness swallowed the corridor. Ilara's visor flared with emergency night optics, green shapes hazy in the gloom. But through the grainy vision, she saw something move, not ahead, not behind. Between them. A ripple of distortion, like heat rising off asphalt, weaving among the crew. And then the whisper came. Not over the comms, inside their helmets, inside their minds. You shouldn't be here. There, did you see that? Mason hissed. His night optics flickered, catching a blur low to the floor, scuttling with impossible speed before vanishing behind a bulkhead. Movement confirmed, Rourke said grimly, voice steady though his knuckles whitened around the rifle grip. Hold formation. Ilara's eyes strained against the dark. Shapes wavered in her vision, dissolving before she could pin them down. Then, for an instant, she saw it. Something tall, too thin, with limbs bending at wrong angles. Its head turned toward her, but instead of eyes, there was only shadow, a void deeper than the dark around it. And then it was gone. Her chest tightened. It looked right at me, she whispered. Jonah's breath came ragged, panicked. It's not real. It can't be real. But Mason shook his head violently. No, I saw it too, I swear. The whisper returned, stronger now, like a chorus pressed directly against their skulls. Leave before it takes you apart. Ilara gritted her teeth, forcing steel into her voice. It's trying to scare us. That's all this is. Rourke didn't answer. His visor caught a faint distortion at the far end of the corridor, a smear of wrongness against the wall. He steadied his rifle, but the thing slipped into the shadows again, soundless. The mist thickened, curling around their boots like fingers. Jonah snapped, voice rising. "We need to fall back, Commander. We can't—" The metal screamed. A section of bulkhead ahead dented outward as if struck from the other side, hard enough to send a shudder through the deck. The sound reverberated, sharp and jagged, until every nerve in their bodies vibrated with it. Then silence. Rourke exhaled slowly. "We move, eyes up. No one breaks." The crew obeyed, but the silence was heavier now. The sense of something just ahead, or worse, walking among them, never letting go. This gives listeners a first brush with the creature, barely formed, almost more suggestion than sight, while leaving plenty of space for bigger, more horrifying reveals later. The team pressed deeper, weapons raised, every sound magnified by the silence. Drips of condensation tapped against metal in slow rhythms, each one setting Jonah more on edge. He flinched at every echo, every scrape. They reached a wide chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. Broken consoles lined the walls, their screens cracked and dead. Mason swept his light across the wreckage, revealing torn chairs, shattered glass, and what looked disturbingly like deep claw marks scored into the steel floor. Jonah muttered, "Nope, nope, this place is cursed." "Quiet," Rourke snapped, but not unkindly. His own voice sounded hollow in the cavernous space. Elara knelt beside the gouges. Her gloved fingers traced the grooves. They were too clean, too deliberate. Not mechanical, not human. Something else. Before she could speak, Mason gave a low whistle. "Well, at least no one's shooting at us. Could be worse." He flashed a grin, trying to chase away the tension. Jonah rolled his eyes, but a faint smile tugged at his lips, despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "Don't joke," Elara warned, standing. "Not here." For a heartbeat, the chamber almost felt lighter, as though Mason's forced levity had broken the suffocating weight. The shadows seemed to loosen their grip just slightly. Then the lights flickered. One by one, the overhead lamps sparked to life, filling the chamber with pale, artificial glow. The crew startled, weapons raised, then froze in confusion. Because every screen in the chamber had turned on. Dozens of shattered monitors, dead a moment ago, now glowed with static. Lines of code rippled across them in fractured patterns. Some screens displayed words, unintelligible, scrambled. Others showed distorted images of faces, stretched and broken, mouths open in silent screams. Elara's breath caught. "It's communicating." The static surged, and all the screens blinked black at once. A single phrase replaced the chaos, repeated across every monitor in perfect synchronization. "We see you." The words pulsed in unison, like a heartbeat. The moment of relief was gone, replaced by a dread that felt more intimate now, like the thing in the shadows was no longer just watching them. It was with them. The words blinked twice more. "We see you." Then every screen died at once. The chamber plunged back into its hollow silence. Jonah was already backing toward the door, muttering rapid prayers under his breath. Mason gave him a sharp shove to steady him. "Commander," Elara said, her voice lower than before, "whatever that was, it's not random, it's intelligent." Rourke's jaw tightened. He scanned the chamber one last time, then motioned toward the corridor. "We regroup. We're no use if we lose our heads." They retreated down the passage, boots echoing against the metal grating. For once, nothing followed. No whispers, no shadows darting at the edge of vision. Just the hollow hum of a ship long dead. When they finally sealed themselves into a smaller chamber, some kind of crew quarters, the change in atmosphere was immediate. The air was still cold, but without the oppressive static in their ears, it felt safer. Jonah slumped against the wall, pulling off his helmet long enough to wipe the sweat from his brow. "I'm done. That's it. We saw words appear out of thin air. I don't care how much money they're paying us, we're walking corpses if we stay." Mason dropped onto a bunk frame with a clang, forcing a grin. "Relax. Maybe it just wanted to say hello." Jonah shot him a glare. "Oh yeah, real friendly. I bet it'll bake us cookies next." Despite himself, Rourke's lip twitched, almost a smile. The exchange reminded him, for a fleeting instant, of how human they still were, even here, on this derelict tomb. Elara sat opposite them, quiet, lost in thought. No, she murmured finally. It wanted us to know we're not in control anymore. Whatever it is, it's playing with us. The silence that followed pressed down heavier than before. Still, for a little while, the crew managed to rest, sharing ration packs, checking weapons, trading muttered jokes to keep Jonah from unraveling completely. It wasn't peace, but it was enough to make the horror feel distant. For now, hours passed in uneasy half-sleep. Mason kept his rifle propped against the bunk, drifting in and out of dreams that all ended the same way. Static flooding his vision, a shadow crouching just beyond the reach of his light. Jonah sat awake, jittery, unable to close his eyes. Every creak of the ship made him flinch. He whispered now and then, too quiet for anyone else to hear, trying to convince himself he'd live long enough to see another sunrise on Earth. Rourke, ever the soldier, paced the narrow room like a caged animal. His discipline kept him moving, but not even he could ignore the way the ship seemed to hum under their feet, as though its bones remembered something it shouldn't. Only Elara seemed steady. She had set up a portable scanner on the bunk, its weak display flickering as it cycled through readings. She focused on the data, her expression unreadable. Finally, she broke the silence. This isn't random. The electromagnetic spikes, the power surges, it's localized. It knows where we are, and it chooses when to show itself. Jonah swallowed hard. So, what? It's hunting us? No, Elara said softly. She glanced at him, then back to the screen. It's studying us. The words sank into the room like a weight. Mason let out a low whistle. Well, that's comforting. Good to know we're someone's science project. Rourke stopped pacing. His voice was low, certain. Whatever it is, it bleeds. If it bleeds, we can kill it. Jonah shook his head violently. You didn't see those marks in the floor, Commander. That wasn't claws. That was something worse. We don't even know what kind of body this thing has. For a moment, nobody spoke. The quiet stretched until Mason finally muttered, I'll take the first watch. Try to get some sleep at least. And somehow they did. For a short while, in the brittle comfort of that abandoned room, the crew almost convinced themselves they were safe. Almost. Because in the corridor just beyond their sealed door, something moved. Not footsteps, not breath, just a ripple in the stale air. A distortion as though the ship itself exhaled. And then, silence again. The silence pressed in on them, thick as stone. Elara tried to convince herself the movement outside the door had been nothing, just the ship settling. But deep down, she knew better. The first sound came softly, a scrape like nails dragged along metal, slow, deliberate. Jonah sat bolt upright, helmet back on, rifle trembling in his hands. It's here, he whispered, barely audible. Rourke motioned for silence, but his eyes were locked on the sealed door. The scraping grew louder, circling the room as if whatever it was could see them through the walls. Mason cursed under his breath. It's toying with us. Then came the whisper, clearer this time, not inside their minds, but muffled through the metal. A voice, warped and broken, mimicking human speech. Help me. Elara's blood ran cold. The voice was wrong, like a recording played backward, but it was close enough to sound human. Jonah's hands shook. It's one of the crew, trapped out there. No, Elara snapped, more sharply than she meant to. That's not anyone we know. That's it. The voice came again, louder, closer. Open, please, open. The lights flickered. For half a second, Elara saw it through the small viewport in the door, a glimpse of something tall, crooked, its face pressed to the glass. The features writhed, shifting, as though the thing was still deciding what kind of face it should wear. And then darkness swallowed it again. The door groaned under a sudden impact. Once, twice, the metal buckled inward with a sickening crunch. Jonah screamed, raising his rifle, It's coming in! Rourke's voice cut through the panic, hard and unyielding. Hold positions, do not break. The next strike shook the entire room. Dust rained from the ceiling, monitors shattered. The door was bending now, inward, each blow carving a deeper dent. And just as suddenly as it began, the pounding stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise, because silence meant it was already inside. The crew stood frozen, rifles trained on the warped door. The silence dragged like a blade across their nerves. Then, metal shrieked. Something thin and black as oil pushed through the twisted seam of the door. At first it looked like a cable or a root, slick and glistening under the emergency lights. But it flexed, jointed, like a finger. Jonah stumbled backward, choking on his own breath. "Oh God, it's in—" The limb writhed, stretching further inside, curling against the wall like it was tasting the room. The surface shimmered, never holding one shape. In one moment it looked bone-pale and skeletal, the next dark and sinewy, muscle twitching beneath translucent skin. Rourke fired. The rifle cracked like thunder, muzzle flash lighting the chamber. The round struck the thing, tearing a chunk of it away. Black ichor sprayed against the wall, sizzling as if it burned the metal. The limb recoiled with a screech. Not mechanical, not human, but something between. The sound drilled straight into their skulls, making every nerve vibrate. Mason grabbed his scanner, shouting over the noise. "It bleeds! Commander, you were right! It bleeds!" But Elara wasn't celebrating. She was staring at the ichor as it oozed across the floor. It wasn't just liquid, it was moving. Curling into strange geometric patterns, shifting like it was alive even after being torn free. The limb thrashed once more, then pulled back through the door with unnatural speed. Silence followed again, broken only by the hiss of their own breathing. Jonah collapsed against the wall, helmet clattering against metal. "We're dead. We're already dead. You don't wound something like that and walk away." Rourke chambered another round, jaw tight. "Then we don't walk, we hunt." Elara shook her head slowly, eyes fixed on the black smear still writhing on the floor. Her voice was almost a whisper. "No, it's hunting us." The commander checked the bent door and signaled Mason to keep his weapon trained while he tugged the twisted seam with both hands. Metal grated, nothing else came through. The black smear on the floor stopped writhing and congealed into a dull stain that refused to soak into the scuffed plating. Elara kept staring at it as if it would start moving again if she blinked. "We need to follow it," the commander said, still breathing hard. "Whatever it is, it didn't get far." "Follow it where?" Mason asked. "Through the walls?" Elara lifted her scanner and adjusted the sensitivity until the display showed a ghostly fog of electromagnetic noise. A thin thread of elevated energy leaked away from the door jamb and toward the central shaft. It left a trail. Jonah swallowed. That trail could be a trap. "Everything is a trap now," the commander said. "We move." They pried the door open enough to squeeze into the corridor. The ship's lights flickered as if reacting to their decision. Elara led with the scanner held out like a divining rod. The line of interference curled down a stairwell and into the shuttle's mid-hold, a rectangular space of cargo cages and winches that smelled faintly of coolant and cold metal. Their boots rang on the grating. Somewhere under the floor, pumps thudded, a slow heartbeat of the ship that made the railing vibrate. "Left," Elara said, and they flowed along the catwalk one after another, rifles lifted. Jonah kept close enough that she could feel the edge of his shoulder brushing her suit. The contact steadied her more than she wanted to admit. Mason flicked his light into the nearest cage. "Empty. Next to—" "Empty." He paused. "Wait." The beam snagged on a shape in the far corner, a helmet, its visor spider-webbed but intact, propped upright against a crate like someone had carefully set it there for later. The insignia on the brow matched their own. "That wasn't ours," Jonah said quietly. "We haven't stored gear down here." "Leave it," the commander said. As they moved past, Elara glimpsed the helmet's visor from another angle. Her breath stuck. A faint outline seemed pressed to the inside of the glass, like a face from the wrong side peering out. She jerked her eyes away and kept moving, pulse racing. The trail curled beneath a maintenance hatch. Mason crouched, lifted it with the tip of his rifle, and glanced at the yawning crawlspace below. A cold draft lifted the hair at Elara's nape. "It wants us down there," Jonah said. "That's fine," the commander answered. "We'll give it what it wants." They dropped one by one, boots thumping onto the lower deck beside thick bundles of conduit. The air was colder here, the mist from the vents thicker, a fine chalk that clung to lashes and beaded on suit joints. Something ticked rhythmically far down the passage, then stopped the moment they listened for it. "Signal?" the commander asked. Elara checked. "Stronger," she said. "Ahead and everywhere, like it's in the wires." They advanced in silence that somehow wasn't silent anymore, a pressure between sounds, that sense of being overheard in your own thoughts. When the corridor bent, the commander motioned for Elara to hang back while he took point, sweeping the corner with crisp, practiced motions. Nothing jumped, nothing rushed. The nothing felt intentional. "Still with me?" Jonah murmured, his voice small and warm in her ear, even through the cold. "Don't drift," she said. He gave a humorless chuckle. Wasn't planning on it. Ahead, the passage opened into a chamber ringed with open panels. Cables spilled out in tangled loops like intestines. The overhead lights were dead, leaving their helmet lamps to cut cones of clarity in a sea of grey. In the center of the floor lay another smear of black. This one hadn't congealed, it pulsed faintly. Their lights made its surface crawl. Mason nudged it with the tip of his boot. "If it leaps at my face," he said, "please shoot me before it finishes the job." "Don't touch it," Elara snapped. He withdrew his foot and held up a hand. All right. The commander crouched and squinted, then straightened. "We're done following blood. We make the thing come to us." "By asking nicely," Jonah said. "By cutting off everywhere it can go." They split, sealing doors, pulling manual levers that thumped into place with satisfying finality. For the first time since the knocking, purpose felt heavier than fear. Elara rerouted power on a local panel, forced an old blast damper to slide down over a side tunnel, and the slam of it shuddered through her bones like a bell. Jonah hauled a crate into position to block a hatch that wouldn't lock without power. Mason helped him, grunting, the crate scraping a harsh path across the floor. When they returned to the center of the chamber, the black smear was gone. They froze. The commander swept the room, then lifted his finger to his lips. In the tight beam of Elara's lamp, faint wetness glistened on the underside of a cable run. The stain laddered along the ceiling and disappeared into a seam where two plates met. "Above," Elara whispered. Jonah lifted his rifle. "How do you shoot a ceiling?" "You don't," the commander said. "You flush it." He found the emergency purge valve, a yellow lever capped with a rusted seal, and yanked. Somewhere in the walls, vents shuddered open. The chamber's air pulled toward the grates, a thin tugging that made Elara's suit creak. Dust spiraled. The cables above trembled like nervous fingers, and the seam in the ceiling split. What came out wasn't a body, so much as possibility forced into a shape. Too long and too thin, bending at angles that made Elara's eyes ache to track it. She fired on instinct. The creature shrank back into the dark, with a sound like a breath being sucked through teeth. Too close to her ear. Jonah fired as well, hole-punching a panel that screamed and fell. The purge tug increased, pulling a fog of fine ash toward the vents until the commander slammed the lever back down and the room sighed into stillness. Silence. Dust settled. Their panting filled the space. Mason lowered his rifle slowly. That was not a rat. "Move," the commander said. "It'll circle." They pulled back the way they'd come, past the open panels, past the crate gouge, up through the maintenance hatch. In the cargo hold, the helmet sat exactly where they'd left it, visor reflecting their lights. Jonah stared at it, jaw clenched. "Don't," Elara said, reading the thought before he voiced it. He nodded and kept walking. They didn't speak much as they climbed to the forward compartments. Fear had stripped language down to function. Check that latch, hold that angle, cover that corner. Even Mason ran out of commentary. The hum in the bones of the ship changed timbre as they approached the cockpit, from a slow pulse to a faint tremor that made the floor feel like a throat swallowing. "I hate this," Jonah said, a whisper that barely reached her. "I hate not knowing what it wants." Elara answered without looking at him. "It wants us to make a mistake." The cockpit door stood half open. The commander motioned them to hold while he slipped inside. Panels glowed a weak, unhealthy green. The pilot's chair sat twisted, the safety harness unbuckled but drooping as if it had slumped. Outside the forward viewports, the storm over the planet's horizon had thickened into a bruise. "That cluster's moving fast," the commander said. "If we're not airborne soon, we're welded to the ground." "Can we lift with it inside?" Mason asked. "We don't have a choice." Ilara took the co-pilot's station and pulled up the shuttle's systems. Power distribution flickered, life support threw warnings like confetti. But the engines answered when she teased the throttle, a low rumble that rolled across the hull. She allowed herself one long breath. "We can do this." "Say it like you believe it," Jonas said from behind her, and there was almost a smile in it. The ship bucked. "Hold," the commander barked, gripping the back of Ilara's chair. The bucking became a shiver, the shiver a steady vibration like 100 fingertips tapping under the floor. Ilara saw diagnostic bars spike and fall, not in error but in rhythm, like someone was drumming on the data itself. "Stop touching my ship," Mason said, hands flying as he rerouted lines. "This is a violation." The tapping stopped. For a full 10 seconds, nothing moved. Ilara's eyes tracked a lonely line of numbers, watched them stabilize. She lifted the throttle again, gentle as a prayer. The landing struts groaned. Dust slid from the hull. Then the forward viewports went black. Not dim, not dead, black, like something enormous had placed its palm over the glass. Jonah swore. "What is—" The blackness peeled away in one fluid motion, like someone withdrawing a hand, and for a fraction of a second she saw the impression left behind. A shape in the frost that looked horribly like a face that had been pressed flat against the window. It had no eyes, or it had too many. Her brain refused to count. "Up," the commander said, the word low and clean as a trigger pull. Ilara brought the shuttle off the ground. Engines howled, the hull shuddered. Outside, ash-laden air churned into vortices that trailed like torn fabric. The ship fought gravity like it hated the planet for holding them. Slowly, with a grinding reluctance, the shuttle climbed. "Altitude," Mason called. 30 meters, 50, we're—" The lights cut. Weightlessness tugged at Ilara's stomach as the ship fell through air that felt suddenly too thin to bear them. Her hands moved without thinking. Auxiliary power, manual bypass, hard restart. The boards stayed dead, the cockpit a cave lit only by the panic-colored glow of their helmets. "Brace," the commander said, and they hit, hard enough to jar the soul loose. Everything went quiet. Even the storm outside seemed to pause and lean closer to listen. A whisper slid through the cabin from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Closer, see," it said, as if amused. Closer. Ilara's head rang. Jonah was at her side instantly, pulling her upright. "You with me?" "I'm here," she said, though it felt like a lie. "I'm here." The commander checked his rifle and turned away from the dead panels. "We can't lift with it crawling over us. We drag it off." "With what?" Mason asked. "A stern lecture." "With ourselves," the commander said. He glanced at Ilara. "We open the bay and we run it." She knew what he meant. Lure it in, lure it out, be prey in the shape of bait. "I'll go," she said, before Jonah could volunteer, because she knew he would. He stared at her. "Absolutely not." "We don't have time to argue," she said, standing. "I'm faster. I know the ship." "Faster is not a force field," he said sharply. The commander's gaze moved between them. "We need two," he decided. "One to draw, one to cover. Mason stays with the engine relays. If we get 2 minutes of clean power, we're in the air." Jonah said, "I'm going." Ilara said, "I'm going." The commander looked like he wanted to order both of them to stay put and do this himself. He didn't. He nodded once, hard. "Masks on. Secure lines. On my mark." They moved fast, because the only way to do this and remain human was to do it before they started thinking. Ilara clipped a guideline to her belt and snapped the other end to a ring at the hatch. Jonah mirrored her on the opposite side, the two lines crossing like fragile threads over a chasm. Mason stood at the control panel with his hands hovering over the manual breakers. "You get me 90 seconds, he said, voice low. "I'll give you sky." "Mark," the commander said, and hit the hatch release. Cold air punched inward with a fistful of glass. The ramp dropped, grinding against ash and gravel. The storm beyond had thickened into streaks of grit. The world was grey and wrong and breathing. "Now," the commander said. Elara ran. The air outside clawed at her clothes and found seams to slip in, needling her skin with 1,000 tiny teeth. She kept her head low and her feet high, and she didn't think. Jonah's boots hammered somewhere to her left, just out of sight. They darted past the scorched landing struts, the underside of the hull looming overhead like a cliff. The guidelines thrummed with wind. "Where?" Jonah shouted into the gale. "Anywhere," she shouted back. "Get it angry." "Consider it done." He leaned into the wind and fired 3 shots into the ash where the blackness had draped the viewport. The sound cracked and vanished and came back in pieces. For 1 heartbeat, nothing happened, and then ash billowed under the hull like a living thing exhaling, and something uncoiled from the darkness with the sound of wet cloth tearing. Elara felt it before she saw it, a pressure against the skin like a change in air before lightning. The shape that slid from beneath the ship did not cross so much as erase the distance, reappearing closer than it had any right to. It turned toward Jonah and stood a fraction straighter in a poor imitation of a human gesture, as if to meet him on his level. "Is this posture making you less afraid?" "Left," Elara shouted, and Jonah moved without looking, trusting her voice, diving for the cover of the strut. The thing followed with a speed that denied muscles and bone. Elara fired, the recoil jarring her elbow. The round struck and blackness splashed like rain. The creature's head, the idea of its head, tilted toward her. It made no face. It didn't need one to make her feel seen. "Come on," she said under her breath, and ran wider to draw it away. Her guideline ran out with a hard jerk at her waist. She skidded and pivoted and fired again, barely registering that she'd hit anything at all until the sound reached her. A low, irritated scrape like a dull blade dragged over slate. Annoyance. That was all she'd bought. 30 seconds, Mason's voice said in her ear, far away and too loud. "I can give you 30, maybe." The creature flowed toward her. Flowed was the only word. The rest were wrong. Walked, crawled, sprinted. The motion wasn't motion. It was a place deciding to be a different place. The guideline shook at her belt. She backed up as fast as she dared. Jonah shouted something she didn't hear. The commander fired from the ramp, careful, measured. The rounds sparked off stone and bit nothing. The thing blurred, not dodging so much as refusing to exist where the bullets wanted it. Elara reached the end of her line again and yanked hard, swinging herself sideways to put the hull between them. The creature slid after, its edge catching on metal with a squeal. For 1 heartbeat it stuck, and she saw it close, close enough to fix details whether she wanted them or not. The way its surface tried on textures and discarded them, the hint of hands that failed to be, the shiver of a mouth forming and unforming around sounds it didn't know yet. "Now," Mason said, and power punched the hull. The ship screamed awake. Engines thundered. The ground shuddered, ash lifting in sheets. The creature recoiled as the vibration hit it through the metal, a ripple running the length of it like a shiver through a coat. It wasn't hurt. It was offended. "Up," the commander barked. "Up, up." Elara ran for the ramp, the guideline dragging at her waist. Jonah hit the grating from the other side at the same moment, boots slipping, hands grabbing hers without looking. They hauled each other into the mouth of safety, and the commander hit the hatch control. The ramp rose. Wind fought it. The hydraulics moaned. Something slammed into the underside of the ramp with bone-deep force. The metal buckled upward between Elara's knees, throwing her against Jonah's chest. He grunted and wrapped an arm around her automatically. For 1 bare instant, it felt like the most human thing left in the universe. Then the ramp sealed, the locks fired, and the ship lurched upward. Mason whooped into the comms like a madman. "Altitude achieved. I am a god. Do not speak to me unless it's to offer offerings." "Save the sermon," the commander said, but Elara heard the relief he didn't allow himself to show. The shuttle climbed. The storm played claws across the hull, and the engines answered with a howl that deepened into a steady roar. Panels flickered back from the dead like waking eyes. The cockpit flooded with thin blue light. "Elara," Jonah said, breathless and close. "You good?" She nodded, chest heaving. "I'm here." He laughed, a ragged sound. You keep saying that, because I'm afraid if I stop saying it, I won't be. He squeezed her shoulder once and let go. They didn't speak for a while. It was enough to feel the floor tilt under their feet, and know they were rising away from something that wanted them nearer. Mason babbled happiness at the engine readouts. The commander monitored the storm. Elara finally allowed her muscles to unclench. Then the intercom crackled. It was not the ship. "Jonah," a voice said, quiet and familiar and wrong. "Jonah, please." He went very still. "Elara," he whispered, "you heard that too." "I heard it," she said. "Jonah," the voice said again, this time with a tremor he'd heard 100 times, back on missions that ended with blood and starlight. "It's me." He swallowed. "It sounds like Sarah," he said hoarsely. "It sounds exactly like—" "It's not," Elara said. "It's never her." The voice shifted on a breath and came back with a smile in it. "Elara?" She closed her eyes. "Don't. You're doing well," it said kindly. "Such a steady hand, such a careful mind." "Cut the feed," the commander said. Mason hit switches. Nothing changed. The voice filled the cabin the way dark fills water. "It's lonely out here. You don't have to be. You can come down. We can show you where the sound comes from, where the pictures grow." "Mute it," the commander snapped, and Mason killed the intercom completely. The voice kept talking. They listened to it for a long time because they couldn't help it. Eventually, it tired of being a person and let the words melt back into clicks and sighs that didn't use lungs. The storm began to fall away beneath them, a bruise blossoming in reverse. The planet curved. Space yawned black and clean. "Orbital line?" the commander asked. Elara did not trust the ship until she felt the gentle slide of microgravity settle her organs. Only then did she exhale. "We're clear." "Docking with the Odyssey," Mason said, fingers dancing. "Upper ring, if the doors aren't full of teeth." "Enough," the commander said, but there was no real bite to it. They glided toward their mothership, a grey wheel turning in blackness, scarred with age, and the pride of missions survived. Elara had never loved it more. Docking clamps latched with a shudder that traveled the hull like relief. The gangway extended. The door cycled. "Teams of 2, the commander said. "No one alone. Mason, you're with me. Elara, Jonah." She felt Jonah tense beside her and understood it without looking at him. If the voice kept using his dead, he would need someone who didn't. "I've got him," she said. The Odyssey felt empty when they stepped through. Lights burned. Systems hummed. But the usual distant clatter of crew, the tinny laugh of music from someone's bunk, the ever-present vibration of human presence, all absent. They had docked on the dark side, so the windows only showed stars. Their footsteps echoed. Elara set her jaw. "Check the bridge," she said, "if the ship's core is compromised." A laugh drifted down the hall. It was soft and careless, and not from any living throat. Elara's skin pimpled. Jonah's knuckles went white around his rifle. "Bridge later," he said, and when she glanced at him, she saw something fierce and stubborn in his eyes. "We make sure this deck isn't wearing a friend." They moved cautious as cats through the ring. Screens flickered as they passed, each showing the same thing in a different way. Static, a breath, a face stretched until the mouth became a tunnel. Elara turned the man off by habit, and the screens turned themselves on again by whatever broke habits for sport. Near the crew quarters, a door stood ajar. A faint light pulsed within, as if a heart had learned to be a lamp. Elara lifted a hand, and Jonah stopped with her, poised to snarl if she told him to leave when everything in him demanded they look. "On 3, she said, and her voice didn't shake. They swung the door wide and found a room that had been redistributed. Bunks peeled like opened cans, lockers clawed thin, a desk pushed into a wall and left there to vibrate slightly with the hum of the ship. On the floor in the center, a pool of black that reflected the ceiling wrong. In it, a voice made of 100 borrowed throats said almost conversationally, "Closer." "I am so tired of that word," Jonah said. He fired, the pool spattered, the black hissed, and the thing rose. It brought the room with it. Metal groaned and flexed. Cabinets slid, lids clanged. A picture frame flung itself off a wall to shatter on the deck. The form that assembled out of the pool was taller than the door and thinner than reason. It folded itself down and bent its head like a person listening. It looked at Elara. She had the ridiculous sense of being catalogued. Jonah moved to stand between them before he realized he was moving. "You want me," he said hoarsely, as if the thing were reasonable. "You keep wearing my dead to pick me. Here I am." It tilted. The voice turned soft and female and reached back through his past. "Jonah," it said gently, and the way it said his name made Elara want to put her hands over his ears like she could keep it out. He shook, but he didn't lower his weapon. "You don't get to have her." The thing smiled without a mouth. Elara fired. Her shot struck center mass, if the creature had a center, and blew a thumb-sized hole that rippled and closed like a bubble popping underwater. Mason's observation echoed back. It bled, but not like they did. The thing turned toward her as if mildly surprised to find she still existed. "Run," she said, and when Jonah didn't move, she shoved him backward into the corridor so hard his shoulder hit the frame. He stumbled, swore, and ran. They ran together. The thing came after in a way that was neither swift nor slow, but absolute, like gravity applies itself. Lights died in front of it, came back behind it. Doors decided to be walls. The Odyssey became a labyrinth engineered to shepherd prey. "Engineering," Elara said between breaths. "If we can flood the ducts, then we can lose it," Jonah finished, and she could have hugged him for understanding her over the panic. They took a turn too hard. His boot slipped on a smear of oil, and he pinwheeled, recovering only because she grabbed his harness and yanked him upright. He grunted a thanks that ended in a gasp. She didn't look back. Looking back had never saved anyone in any story she'd ever loved. Engineering's hatch refused their first code, and then their second, and then yielded on the third, as if humor required a proper rule of 3. They slammed it and spun the manual wheel while the alarms bleated small and frightened. Elara grabbed the purge control with both hands. "On my count," she said. 3, 2. Something moved in the corner. She whipped around with her weapon up and found Jonah with his hands raised, eyes wide, mouth open, her name on his lips. It was not Jonah. But it was, in every way that mattered, while blood pounded and fear chewed holes in reason. His smell, his stance, the raw scrape in his voice from shouting her name 100 times down iron corridors. She had a blink to choose, and in that blink the thing cocked its head, getting closer to the exact angle of how Jonah begged. She fired. The shot hit the real Jonah square in the chest as he burst through the hatch behind the imitation. His body snapped backward with a horrible grace. He hit the deck with his eyes already confused. He stared up at her with a question in them he hadn't decided whether to ask. The fake Jonah dissolved into a smear that slid like oil under the door and fled. "No," Elara said, the word a bare breath lost in alarms. She fell to her knees. The hole in Jonah's suit was a mouth trying to close. His fingers groped for hers, and she gave them everything. Both hands, all the strength she had left to hold on. "I thought it," he said, chest hitching. "I know," she said, because the truth was harder and kinder than any lie. "I know, love, I know." His eyes softened at the word she hadn't meant to spend yet. A tiny, stupid smile tugged one corner of his mouth. "Love," he repeated, like he was filing it somewhere he'd needed for years. "Stay," she said. "Don't make me," he whispered, so gently she almost missed it. And then his breath fell apart into small sounds and stopped trying to be breath at all. The alarms kept bleating. Elara pressed her forehead to his, rigid with a grief so clean it burned. She had killed him. The thing had helped. Had guided her hands, had set the scene and lit the lights, but her finger had pulled. The shape of that truth would never fit into any box that allowed sleep. She sat with him while outside the hatch, something scraped and hissed, testing the seam, amused. "Get up," she told herself finally, with no heat left in her voice. "Get up, or make this the place you die." Her legs obeyed, because obedience was what they'd been trained for. She sealed Jonah's eyes, because tenderness had to survive something. She touched the place her shot had gone through, because punishment demanded it. Then she stood and turned the purge control. Valves opened like a row of throats swallowing. Pressure screamed through the ducts, a ripping roar that shook the walls. The lights flickered and steadied. Somewhere very near, the thing made a sound like metal laughing. "Come on," she said, not to it but to herself, and pulled the lever to maximum. The Odyssey groaned. For a second she thought she'd tear her own ship in half. Then the pressure wave hit the hatch, and something on the other side slapped flat against it like a thrown sheet. The seam blew frost. The scrape turned into a real, honest snarl. She had hurt it. If not its body, then its pride. "Good," she said. "Hurt." The commander's voice crackled in her ear, harsh with static. "Ilara, report." She swallowed twice before sound returned. "Engineering is maintained," she said, and hated the word even as she chose it. "Jonah?" he asked, hope held up like a shield. She let it fall for him so he wouldn't have to. "Gone." Silence. The kind of silence men make when they put grief in a drawer so they can use their hands. When the commander spoke again, it was a sentence with the edges all sanded off. "We finish it," he said. "Yes," she said, "we do." They met at the spine junction, the ship's narrow waist where corridors crossed like the heart's own paths. Mason's eyes widened when he saw her face and then flicked to the red smeared over her suit. He didn't ask, he only made a small noise that might have been sorrow and forced his hands to stay steady. The commander looked older by a decade. He held out a detonator and a coil of line. "We take it to the outer ring," he said. "We vent that section and any god it worships." Ilara took the coil. "It will know." "It already does," he said.